political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
Hey, welcome back, folks, to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy on this beautiful day. We're so glad to have you joining us for 2 hours of talk radio right here from MacArthur Airport, local for Suffolk County. And we're so proud to be part of this station because it gives the folks of Suffolk County the ability to provide feedback and to listen to us pontificate on issues that are of national nature, state, and even local. And today we're going to have a little of each. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes in my opening about a few issues of the week. In the second segment, we're going to be joined by Bill O'Reilly, not the Bill O'Reilly from Fox TV, who's remarkably interesting, but an equally interesting guy. It's Bill O'Reilly, the same name, but he happens to be a Republican strategist in New York, and he is a columnist for Newsday. His articles are very provocative, and we're going to be talking to him about a number of things, his ideas of conservatism versus liberalism, etc. We're going to have E.J. McMahon, who is the guru of state politics and a real wonderful advocate for taxpayers. You know, all of the special interests out there have their own advocates. It's nice to see that we have an informed, articulate advocate for taxpayers. He's going to be breaking down the budget with us. And finally, we're going to have another Newsday columnist, Lane Filler, who is a witty and insightful columnist for Newsday. He's really emblematic of the fact that Newsday is going a little more moderate than some of their more liberal ways years and years ago. He writes some great stuff, and he's going to talk about Common Core. There's a lot of people who are protesting Common Core, and I think a lot of people don't even know what it is. They know generally what it's about, but when you ask specifically what is it, I have a hard time explaining what it is. We want to hear what Lane has to say about this, Lane Filler, and I think you'll find it quite interesting. All right, for the opening here, I was dismayed that in my last session with you last Saturday, I was not able to get into the whole issue about Kobe Bryant's remarks that made some news, but actually not nearly as much news as I thought it would make. It made news mostly on the sports channels, which I watch a lot and read a lot about. It made some news on some of the gossip channels, but didn't really make a lot of the hard news or the commentators' news, you know. And here's what happened with this. Kobe Bryant got himself into some hot water because when he was doing an interview for New Yorker magazine, and by the way, we're talking about Kobe Bryant, the great basketball player for the Los Angeles Lakers, a five-time champion, and he was asked about the Trayvon Martin case. And way back when, after that event happened where we were shot by George Zimmerman, LeBron James, who is now known as the greatest player in the world, supplanting Kobe Bryant when he started to get a little gray in the beard, LeBron and the rest of the Heat did some really political stuff. I don't know if you want to call it political, but they were taking a stand. They all wore hoodies and made it quite obvious that they were saying, we're sticking up for Trayvon. And when Kobe Bryant was asked by this reporter, why didn't you do the same? He responded, well, why do you think that I have to take a certain position simply because I'm African American? And it was so profound because there is this tendency for others in the media to assume, to prejudge what is going to be on the mind of an individual simply because he may be white or black or Hispanic or male or female. This is what Kobe said, really, really profound. He said, quote, I won't react to something just because I'm supposed to, because I'm an African American. That argument doesn't make any sense to me. So we want to advance as a society and a culture. But say if something happens to an African American, we immediately come to his defense, yet you want to talk about how far we've progressed as a society. Well, we've progressed as a society. Then don't jump to someone's defense just because they're African American. You sit and you listen to the facts just like you would in every other situation, right? So I won't assert myself. Wow, it sure makes sense to me, and I think he deserved applause for that, and he also needed a bulletproof vest, because once you say something as politically incorrect as that and don't drink the Kool-Aid and follow the narrative that you're supposed to take, the arrows would come. And that's exactly what happened. Jim Brown, the great running back in the NFL, who was a hero of mine when I was growing up, lambasted Kobe, as did this civil rights leader. I'm looking for this gentleman's name here. On self-described civil rights activist Najee Ali, director of Project Islamic Hope, angrily called for a boycott of all things Bryant. Quote, African-American youth should no longer buy Bryant's jerseys or shoes and should boycott all the products he endorses. My goodness, all because Kobe Bryant said, excuse me, I just want to look at the facts of a situation. And what he said thereafter, he had to do some backtracking. You know, Kobe said, Bryant later tweeted support for Martin, saying, quote, Trayvon Martin was wronged. That's my opinion. And that's what I believe the facts show. And, you know, he's right. I mean, it's hard to say that Trayvon Martin was not wronged. He was a young, innocent kid walking down the street, minding his own business with some Skittles. And, you know, he was dead a few moments later. But as Kobe was saying, that doesn't mean it was murder. You have to look at the facts. And when the jury looked at the facts, in that particular case, there was a wrong, but it didn't amount to a criminal wrong. Now, contrast that with this white guy down south in a gas station who shot and killed some African-American teenagers because he didn't like their rap music. It's outrageous. That guy, based on those facts, was rightfully convicted. Now, albeit he wasn't hit with murder one, but he was still convicted, and that guy's going to be doing a lot of time. But it really does depend on the fact pattern, just like Kobe laid out. And if we're going to get to the point of where Martin Luther King said that you should base your reaction to a person should be judged on the content of their character and not their race. How do we justify pigeonholing a person that you should have a certain reaction just because you are of a certain ethnicity? I remember when I was running for the state Senate, back probably 1990. I went before a lot of groups, you know, and you do interviews, and one was this Jewish group that wanted me to say that I would be in favor and write a letter in support of Jonathan Pollard, who was an Israeli spy. And I think there was an assumption because my name is Levy and my dad was Jewish. My mom was Italian Catholic. I don't know if they were aware of that one way or the other. But the point was they were thinking that I was automatically going to say, sure, I will write this on behalf of this Israeli, Jonathan Pollard. I said, no, I'm an American. The guy was spying on this country. I'm not going to write that letter. But you see this all the time. It's just assumed you are of a certain ethnicity. You must support that ethnicity, right or wrong. That's what they tried to do to Kobe. Kobe said no, good for him. It depends on the facts. And judge me based upon my decision, and don't tell me I have to say a certain thing that you want me to say. Look at the word prejudice. What is it? Prejudge. Do we prejudge him or anyone else as to what they're going to say or what they should say? Let the man speak for himself. That's when we'll know we're in more of a colorblind society, when we no longer prejudge what a man will say or will have to say. Very profound stuff. Didn't get enough coverage, I thought. Now, dovetailing into another really charged issue. It was on the Bill Maher show, Real Time with Bill Maher. You might have seen this. I love this show. I think he's crazy. I've written some articles in the Washington Post that were published on their website about Maher. But one thing about him, he is provocative, and you got to give the guy credit because he doesn't give a damn. He will say anything that's on his mind. He's not running for office. This is what I believe. If you don't like it, you don't like it. The guy, I believe, is anti-American. He's anti-free markets. He's pretty much a socialist. And he's, I think he practices religious bigotry. He's an atheist who really has disdain for belief in a higher power. Anyway, every once in a while, though, Maher comes up with a nugget. And you can pretty much predict where he's going to go, but not always. Like, for instance, predictable. He's a way out there green environmentalist. I mean, he made a statement in one of his shows a few months back saying, why can't we have an infrastructure stimulus plan like Eisenhower did with building roads across the country? We need it and it would stimulate jobs. And my op-ed was, hey, Bill, the reason we can't have that is extremists like you who pop up a tiger salamander or some snail darter or some type of opposition every foot of the way. It's now impossible to do that kind of stuff because of extremists. So that letter got published. Not that Maher read it or made any comment on it, but I bring that up because he really is far out there. But what he did in his last show was fascinating. He brought up the remarks made by Paul Ryan, Congressman Paul Ryan. Ryan said some things that were quite provocative, more so than Kobe Bryant. Ryan basically said, in talking about poverty, we've got to do something that changes this cycle whereby we have now had generations where certain young men, especially in these lower economic stratas, don't even think about looking for work. It is so ingrained that they feel victimized that they're not even going to look for work, and it's just a fait accompli that they believe they are stuck in a life cycle of assistance and dependency on state assistance. He took a beating for this. He was called a racist by fellow by African American Congress people and by various editorialists. So anyway, Maher brings up that quote, and one of the crazy guests that he has, this guy W. Kamau Bell, seemed like he was a self-avowed communist. He's bashing on Martin, say, oh, these Republicans, they're racist, blah, blah, blah. Then Maher pulls a fast one. This is what he says. And how about this other quote from Ryan? And he starts to read the quote. And to paraphrase, it was something along the lines of, in talking to young people, you guys, when it comes to education, you just can't be bothered, many of you. You're sitting around on the couch playing video games and fantasizing about being a baller or a rap star. And there's a hush within the audience, his very liberal audience. And there's ooh and ah, that was a terrible thing to say. And you can see this crazy guest that he has welling in the eyes, ready to say it. And then he says, oh, you know what? Sorry, that wasn't Paul Ryan who said that. That was Michelle Obama who said that. Michelle Obama was saying that at a commencement speech to a group of most minority students, saying, hey, if you are not valuing education and you are putting all your eggs in the one basket of trying to be an NBA player or trying to be a rap star, stop it. Stop it. You've got to get an education. You've got to fight for that education. You've got to value that education. All very wise, profound things to say. But if Paul Ryan, a Republican, had said it, oh my God. But as soon as this guy heard that Michelle Obama said it, all of a sudden, his actual remarks were, well, she had said it as a black woman speaking to a black audience. We talk differently to each other than, you might or we might talk to others. And saying, are you kidding me? Is this your response? Is this your answer? Come on, what she said was absolutely right. What Paul Ryan said was absolutely right. And it goes back to the Kobe Bryant shtick, because what Bryant said rings true here. You assume or you attach a negative meaning to something if it's said by someone you don't like, and you look at it with rose-colored glasses if it's said by someone you like. Really quite educational with those two items over the past week, I'll tell you that. Then there was another thing this past week which really got me to the point where I had to talk about it this morning. It was watching former President Jimmy Carter go on the talk show circuit to build up his book. And his book is all about how women are so discriminated against and actually victimized. And, you know, there's a lot of truth in this. And I was saying, good, I'm glad he did that because, but wait, there's a catch here. I actually wrote an article at the end of last year in 2013, again to the Washington Post, that was published on their website. It was called Malaya Should Be Person of the Year. Now, Time magazine made the Pope a Person of the Year, which can't argue with. The guy really is a driving force in the world today, more so than, just about anybody. But Malaya, to me, is amazing. If you don't know who Malaya is, she is a 15-year-old girl from, I think it was Pakistan, India or Pakistan. I think it was Pakistan. I'm sure it was Pakistan. She was shot in the head and survived. But she was shot in the head because she was preaching out for girls to be able to get an education. Because as we know, in many Muslim countries, especially the Taliban, they are suppressed. And she had the nerve to say this is wrong. Girls have to get an education. She was shot for that. Did she curl into a ball and hide in a corner? No. She spoke out. She went to the United Nations, gave one of the most compelling, articulate speeches I've ever seen for someone who is 45, let alone 15. What an amazing young woman she is. She is a role model for girls and women around the world. And I thought that Carter was going to be picking up on this. In fact, my article was all about how Republicans should pick up on this. The fact that Malaya is speaking to the real war on women around the globe. It's not this make-believe wage discrepancy that Obama and Democrats talk about, that women only make 70 cents on the dollar. That's not true, by the way, because that does not look at comparable jobs and does not take into account when a person leaves the workforce to do family obligations or whatever for 5 or 10 years and then go back into the workforce. So that's a totally distorted thing. But, there's a war on women because there's a debate over not whether you should have contraception provided, but whether it should be paid for by the government, okay? That is what Democrats believe is a war on women. What I'm saying, Republicans should look at the real war on women. The fact that there are 5,000 women every year who are killed in honor killings because they might have had a date with someone unchaperoned or might have had relations outside of the marriage, actually killed because of this. And it's totally acceptable in many places and no one's ever prosecuted on it. 125 million genital mutilations since 1989, mostly on young girls. 60 million girls who are victims of arranged marriages to men without their consent. We're not talking about 18-year-olds. We're talking about 12-year-olds here. That's the war on women, folks. That's where Republicans should be looking. That's where Democrats should be looking. And I've got to hand it to Megyn Kelly of Fox, who's been bringing this out. And they've been, Megyn has been talking about this new movie called Honor Diaries, where they talk about this. And I thought Jimmy Carter's book was going to be about this, but no. What does he say the war against women is? Again, this make-believe wage gap that's been concocted by Democrats. And there is some wage gap, but not the way they say it is. And they say it's rape on college campuses, which, listen, it's awful. It's terrible. It should not be overlooked. It has to be dealt with. But to compare, things that are happening in America to women, to these murders that are happening around the world, the genital mutilations, the abortings, the abortions that are happening in some of these Muslim cultures, not just Muslim cultures, but other cultures, because, and India does this a lot too, because it might be a girl and we don't want a girl because there's a dowry attached, or they might not be able to provide for the family. This is terrible stuff. That's where we should be focusing our efforts. Anyway, leave it to Kathy Young, who has a column in Newsday. She's a syndicated columnist. Hits it on the head. This is what she said. Former President Jimmy Carter has a new crusade, the fight for human rights of women and girls worldwide, particularly against oppression driven by religious zealotry. It's worthy cause, but unfortunately compromised by Carter's insistence that modern Western democracies are just as guilty of sexism as authoritative regimes dominated by medieval fundamentalism. Exactly right. How can you possibly compare the two? In a PBS article, he mentioned unequal pay and inadequate handling of sexual assault on college campuses in this country in the same breath as selective female infanticide and other brutalities against women in the third world as evidence that we too, that's America, have a way to go on gender equality. That's the problem with the Democratic Party today. That's the problem with crazy liberals like Jimmy Carter, who don't get the distinction and always practice this moral equivalency. That's my rant. Come back with us in the next segment, folks. We're going to have E.J. McMahon of the Empire Center for New York State Policy. If you don't know what happened in the state budget and how it affects your pocketbook, stay tuned, listen in. We're going to have E.J. McMahon with us, and then we'll have Bill O'Reilly from Newsday thereafter. Man, it's going to be Bill O'Reilly, not from Fox News, but the other Bill O'Reilly. The second segment coming right up. I mixed them up. at 6:30, or are you ready to go in about 5 minutes? Okay. Okay. You. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. Okay. I'm going to ask you to call the following number, if you could. It's 631. It's a different number than I gave you last night. 631 451 1039. Right, and of course we want to talk about your JFK article, your article on extremism, the one on fairness, the MTA, the liberalism one. If you want to get into Astorino, all of them, it'll be fun. Right, 631 area code. All right, great. Call me whenever. In the next minute. Okay, thanks. Bye bye. Thanks. So long. Okay, we're good. He's calling in. Actually, you can start the show now, and I'll open up and then say, we've got him coming on the line. You know what? You can put him on hold. Yeah. Right. So we're not redoing it. Cue him in. Great. Okay. Yeah, I just let me know when I'm live. Welcome back. We're not going to do music stuff. I'll just go welcome back. Sure.
Oh, hey, Bill, you there?
I'm here, yeah.
Hey, Bill, you can hear me, right?
I can, yeah, perfect.
Okay, so just hold. They're going to cue me in to start the segment. I'm going to say a few opening remarks, and then I'll say, I'll cue you in.
Terrific, great.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
I'll give you your intro.
Yeah.
If you're looking for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
Hey, welcome back, folks, to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is former County Executive Steve Levy, and we hope we whet your appetite in that first 20 minutes. And as I said, we have a treat for you because in this next 20, we have a guy who will get you talking. And when I was telling folks that we had Bill O'Reilly joining us on the show, you know the first reaction. It's that, oh, Bill O'Reilly from Fox, that guy is terrific. We love him. Some love him, some hate him. I said, well, no, it's not that Bill O'Reilly. It's the Bill O'Reilly who is a Republican strategist and one of the top 1, 2, or 3 individuals in the state of New York who I think best articulate the Republican brand. When I first read an article, I'll get into that in a second. Let me bring Bill right on. Bill, are you with us?
I'm with you. How are you, Steve?
Great,
so
Bill.
Good to hear your voice.
I'm just telling you this story about how when I read your first article, and you've been writing now some columns, weekly columns for Newsday, several months, almost a year, I believe.
Yeah.
And when I first saw the Bill O'Reilly name, I was reading, I said, sounds like Bill O'Reilly I know, of course, the Fox Bill O'Reilly. And I'm saying, this is terrific. This is amazing. I love his show, but man, he nails it. And then I see, it's a different Bill O'Reilly, William O'Reilly, when I saw the photo. But I said, man, this is the best stuff I've read in quite a long time to describe the Republican brand. And I have to really commend you. Your articles are the first thing I turn to in the Sunday paper. Even if it's not in the main text, I go to the website because I can't wait to see what you're going to say next because you hit it right on the head every time. And I just wanted to commend you on that and thank you so much for joining us on the show. Hey, tell us real quickly, what's your background?
Background is I'm a native New Yorker, grew up in the city, and I'm up in Westchester County now. I've been working in Republican politics in New York for, I guess, going on about 30 years. And which is always an uphill fight, and so I have a consulting firm called the November Team, and we work with a number of clients. One race of note that we're doing right now is the race for governor. We're representing Rob Astorino.
Hey, just so you know, Rob was on the John Gomez show earlier this afternoon, which is another program on LI News Radio. So we know him well. I served with him as a county executive.
In the next office doing the interview. He sounded very on message.
Absolutely. Good. Keep him on. Keep him on track. But listen, the reason I wanted to get you on this week, I absolutely loved your article last week or 2 weeks ago. When I spoke a little about it last week, but I got you in the flesh here to talk about it, at least by telephone. It was the article about Ronald Reagan, where you noted, the anniversary of his death is going to come up, and all of the mainstream media and the liberal pundits are going to say, if Ronald Reagan were alive today, he wouldn't win the nomination because they're so crazy on the right, blah, blah, blah. And you came back with, you know what? If JFK were alive today, he would not be able to win the Democratic nod, and that's so true. Not in the party of Bill of Pelosi and De Blasio and all these other guys. I always said when people ask me, why did you change from Democrat to Republican? I said, because I'm a John Kennedy Democrat, not a Ted Kennedy Democrat. And you listed all of these quotes by Kennedy that if anybody read, you'd say, oh my God, this guy is a Republican. What do you remember what some of them were?
And you think he's a conservative Republican. In fact, I said in that column, the talking point coming out of the left, of course, which everyone's heard 1,000 times, is, if Ronald Reagan, were trying to run the Republican Party today, he wouldn't stand a chance. He'd be beaten in the primary. The fact of the matter is that if John Kennedy might be the only candidate that could beat Reagan in a Republican primary, based on Kennedy's quotes. I mean, Kennedy was a supply sider. He was probably pro-life. He spoke about abortion with abhorrence.
Well, again, that was before Roe versus Wade, so abortion was illegal at the time, but he was a devout Catholic. Well, no, I don't want. Let me go back on that. He didn't really practice it that much with all of his extramarital affairs, but he was at least Catholic by religion and played to the dogma.
And who knows? That's right. He could have become pro-choice. I mean, it was before the issue was what it is today.
But he did talk about
on the economic side. He was an anti-communist. I mean, a fierce anti-communist.
He actually ran to the right of Richard Nixon in that race in 1960.
That's right, exactly. But he was also anti-socialist. I mean, it was the whole left. I mean, he was He was very much a free market guy. He was a tax cutter.
He actually issued a tax cut that helped grow the economy.
Exactly. If you're going to build the economy, you've got to put money into people's hands, not into the government's hands. And he's got quote after quote after quote on that. And if you read the quotes, if you did blind quotes,
I did.
People today would be shocked that it was John Kennedy. But that was John
your
Kennedy.
point was, it just goes to show that how the media harps on how so-called extreme the Republicans have come. And by the way, I think many of them have gone a little too extreme. And we're New York Republicans, so I think we tend to be more, moderate on the social issues, but fiscally conservative. That's where most Northeast Republicans are, as opposed to some of the Bible Belters down there. Notwithstanding that, you never hear an editorial board or a pundit, at least the liberal pundits out there, talking about how far left the Democrats have ventured. I mean, Clinton did a good job of keeping them centrist in large part because of guys like Dick Morris, but now it's no holds barred. This is the most liberal administration, at least since Johnson and maybe ever.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, it's so ideological. You used to have even the Scoop Jackson Democrats that were a little bit hawkish on foreign policy.
You had blue dog Democrats. Blue dog Democrats. I remember Steve Israel, who's out here in Long Island, when he first started in the early part of the turn of the century, he prided himself as being a blue dog Democrat, which were these moderate guys. Now he's like number 3 on the Democratic top tier. If that's out the window, that I think that unraveled. It doesn't exist anymore. It's all the liberal Nancy Pelosi line.
That's right. And how many people, I mean, we're about the same age, and how many times have you heard people say, I was my parents were Democrats until after John Kennedy, and then they switched.
Yeah.
Or they stayed Democrats, but they voted Republican. It was always after John Kennedy. There was a huge shift in the party in 1968, and it's just never gotten back, and it's moving, more quickly left now.
Well, Reagan shifted it. Reagan did shift it a bit. And but time has gone out. There was a time there where liberal was a dirty word, and nobody would admit to being a liberal. Even now, they call themselves progressive. But it's more in mode. They don't mind calling themselves liberal anymore. That's how much things have changed.
Yeah, it definitely shifts back and forth. But as far as positions go, I mean, you talked about the Republican Party moving right. I think it's more in tone than in positions, and I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make. Is they confuse anger for conservatism, and it's not the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's also, Bill, the way the media defines it. I mean, and I loved your article. It segues into your article about extremism and how it's now become talking points for the Democrats. Just, and Chuck Schumer did this on his conference call. This is what you do. You call the opponent extremist. A perfect example, the DREAM Act, okay, which thankfully it was Republicans in the Senate that stopped it, but who would have thunk it, Bill? Maybe a decade ago, 20 years ago, where you'd say, hey, if you take the position that opposing government taxpayer subsidies to illegal alien students was somehow out of the norm and immoral and extreme, my God, that's how far we've come.
Yeah, it would have seemed crazy. I mean, there's a bill coming down the pike in New York City to give non-citizens voting rights in city elections. They've got the votes in the city council. Mayor de Blasio has already said that he supports it. I mean, can you imagine?
I'll give you another example, and it's going to be in my book, Bias in the Media, which will be coming out.
I can't wait to get it.
I hope you do check it out. You'll love the example. But one of my favorite examples is when these liberal reporters were interviewing guys at the Democratic National Convention in South Carolina, and they're talking about voter ID, and they were wailing, this is terrible, this is a burden to make a person show their ID, it's all an attempt to thwart the vote. And then, other people who were astute enough to realize that, hey, didn't you need a photo ID to get in this building? So all of the Democratic delegates needed a photo ID to get in the darn building. I know when I wanted to get my golf pass at a county golf course, I needed like 3 pieces of ID with photos on them, and you can't ask for an ID to vote? This is insanity.
Yeah, just craziness.
But you really painted it, about how the Democrats now try to paint, they can't just disagree with you. If you are for traditional marriage, you are homophobic.
You have to
If
be
you,
destroyed.
you know,
That's right.
just like the Andrew Cuomo quote, which I'm sure Rob Astorino was going to pounce on, but if you are against extremist gun control, you are a gun-toting nutcase who's anti-children. If you are if you don't subscribe to the theory that everyone's contraception should be paid for by the government, and I'm a pro-choice guy, but I don't think people should pay for Viagra, and I don't think taxpayers should necessarily have to pay for everyone's contraceptive. Yet you're anti-women if you believe that. I just saw the thing on Jimmy Carter's book where we're an anti-women nation. Never mind that in Muslim countries they're killing women if they go out on a date unchaperoned. It's nuts.
You make such a good point, because it's amazing how quickly people tend, on the left, tend to think something is now chiseled in stone law of history. I mean, for example, on the gay marriage issue, I happen to be fine on the marriage equality issue. I think it's an equal rights under the law issue. However, you have people who are pro-traditional marriage that are attacked for being extremist. Where was the other side 10 years ago when no one was even talking about it?
Where was Obama 2 years ago?
It's been traditional marriage.
President Obama 2 years ago was pro-traditional marriage. Was he a bigot back then?
Right. Now you're a knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. Exactly. It's madness.
And I don't know if you saw,
madness.
That nutcase Chris Hayes on MSNBC. He got into it with a Tea Party person. Did you see this? I don't know if you saw this. Where
I can't watch MSNBC.
I can. But you got to watch The Enemy sometimes, and that's why I got to read a lot of these newspapers that I totally disagree with. You just got to see what they're doing.
Read The Nation.
He went after her personally. They were having a debate on Medicare. He said, "Listen, we all know you're against poor people and you don't like the concept." And she tore his head off. You don't know me. How dare you say
incredible?
that? But that's the typical response,
No, that's a typical response. No, exactly right. I think, though, on the extremist thing, I think Governor Cuomo blew it for everybody. I mean, Chuck Schumer set that one up with everyone talking, using the word extremism in every other sentence. But I think Cuomo jumped the shark on that one. It's now kind of a wasted term in New York.
Well, I know your client, Rob Astorino, is going to certainly make hay about that, especially where it resonates upstate, where, the governor is basically telling people upstate, you're not wanted in your own state. Outrageous statement. Arrogant, elitist,
and religious leaders as well. I mean, people of faith that really have feel one way about or have convictions about one issue or the other. I mean, he said you're not welcome in this state. I mean, quote. I mean, you certainly see that quote in ads this year, whether it's by Rob Astorino or by others, but it's going to be out there.
But I find
it was a really striking statement. I mean, it was.
But it's so emblematic of how the left and the irony involved here, where the left preaches to be the group of tolerance and inclusion. They're the most intolerant sector of our society. If, God forbid, you disagree with them. What you're seeing on college campuses, you cannot speak if you have a view that these liberal elitists disagree with.
They say, well, all views are valid except for anyone who disagrees with them. That's the basic philosophy. But the speech codes on campuses is really frightening, and the fact that there's no pushback on the campuses. I mean, I was up at Yale last weekend. I'm on the board of an organization there. There's one conservative professor on the staff at Yale at this point, and he's leaving to go to Princeton.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it's just there's no pushback. There's no one to defend the other side.
Well, Megyn Kelly did a segment on Fox yesterday. She's been doing a great job with this. She's been having the advocates for this new movie. It's called Honor Diaries, which really talks about the absurdity of honor killings and genital mutilation for these young girls in Muslim countries and third world countries, and just horrible stuff. And they wanted to show this movie on a campus in Michigan University, and they were stopped. Yet they were having some kind of fair or expo on the wonders of abortion. Now, again, I'm a pro-choice guy, but if you drink the Kool-Aid and go in a way that is loved by the left, you are allowed to speak, and if you do something to the right, you are not. That's fascism, for God's sake.
No, it's so interesting that you bring it up, because I was never really in the abortion wars, and I have a client that works trying to reduce the abortion rate in New York, and this is very very reasonable people who understand that New York is a pro-choice state, And all they were saying is that, listen, when 60% of African American pregnancies are being terminated, when 40% of all New York City pregnancies are being terminated, something's not working right. The law wasn't intended to do this, and the blowback on that. I mean, these are people who understand that this is a pro-choice state. They're not saying that the law is going to change. The blowback is just extraordinary. And then when you look about the late-term abortion bill, if you're not what they call 100% pro-choice, if you have a problem with late-term abortion, or you have a problem, late-term being
partial birth abortion, which it really used to be.
Exactly. If you have a problem with gender selection abortions, which are becoming rampant in the country,
and around the world, it is. Some of the stats they use is like millions and millions of abortions just because a lot of these places don't want women, and that's the war on women. And again, I'm a pro-choice guy saying this,
exactly.
okay?
And the majority. I mean, I've seen polling on that. The majority of New Yorkers, 92%, agree that that should not be allowed. The gender selection abortions in New York. You have now half abortions going on. They call them, where one twin is being deleted in the womb. I mean, that's tough stuff.
Yeah.
And and there's a lot of gray area on that issue. But
again, if you disagree, I'll tell you, Bill.
Considered extreme on the right. It's crazy.
When I was running for office, I remember you'd go through all the different groups to get an endorsement, and I can tell you when you go to NARAL, National Abortion Rights Council, some of these other groups, they have a litmus test for you. They have choices, and and you say, yeah, I agree with this, I agree with that. It should be, available, folks. And then they ask about partial birth abortion. And if you are not 100% on their questionnaire, you don't get their, you won't get their endorsement. They talk about the NRA.
You're labeled anti-choice,
right?
And then the mailing comes into the households and the telephone calls and the ads. It's like Steve Levy, anti-choice.
But that's
wait a second.
That's how extremism develops. And by the way, that's on both sides. I mean, the NRA does the same thing. You've got to be all the way down the line here. But another one of your articles, which really was right on, and you were one of the few guys to talk about it. I wrote an article to the Long Island Business News about this. It's the MTA, the outrage that they're talking about another fare increase. I think you live up in Westchester, correct?
I do. Yeah.
Do you use the railroad to get in over there, or do you drive in?
I do, and it's about $360 something a month. It's a pretty expensive proposition.
Well, they might be talking about raising it again, and I'm saying the same thing you're saying. I loved your article. Are you kidding me? Look at the abuse within the MTA. Look at these outrageous work rules. Look at these overtime rules. And where is the push by some leader out there to say, hey, instead of raising my rates, instead of raising the tolls, how about going after these damn rules, these crazy pensions and everything else? Nobody wants to talk about it.
I still can't get over it. I know it's been 10 years since that story broke or whatever it's been. But on the Long Island Railroad, the disability story. Oh. I mean, what was that number? 97%?
It was 97%, exposed by the New York Times. Congratulations.
Just absolutely staggering.
But Bill, wouldn't you think that would have been the impetus to say, okay, we're going to get serious and do something? So what happens? It was President Obama's labor board, and again, it really does matter who you elect because he puts in these union stooges on there, and instead of them saying, hey, we've got to get some givebacks from the union, they go to the MTA board, who was trying to do the right thing and trying to get some concessions, and they pressure the board to say, stop it. Just give them their, 2.5%, 3% increase a year and don't ask for any work concessions. Are you kidding me? That's why it matters who gets elected.
When are you going back into public office, Steve? I want in.
Hey, this private sector stuff is fun. I like being the guy who gets to criticize others now for a change. It's fun. It's
That's
good.
great.
Hey,
we missed your voice, though.
Thank you. Hey, we got about a minute left here. I loved your article also about fairness. Again, the fallacy, the 1% and Occupy Wall Street and blah, 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 blah. You pointed out some amazing stats in your article, one being the disproportionately high amount of tax that is generated from the top 1% or 10%. I think the top 1% was like, 37% of all the revenue.
It was almost 40%. And then they're accused of not paying their fair share.
Right. And the top 10%, I believe, pay more than 55%. And then you hear the stat that 50% of the population pays no tax at all.
Yeah, that's right.
No income tax. And yet you still hear, oh, it's unfair. Now, I'm for a progressive income tax. I think it's a good
Sure.
idea. They implemented
Yep.
it, turned it to the 20th century. It didn't hurt us. It helped us. But there's a matter of degree here. And when you're
Exactly.
paying more than 50% of your income from state and federal taxes, there's something wrong with that. But you hit it on the head. You're great.
The left loves to vilify people that are paying 40, 50, 60 million dollars in tax a year, and they get vilified for it. It's bananas.
Well, in the 30 seconds left, what's going to happen with Rob Astorino, your client?
I think he's going to do very, very well because he's a very talented and honest guy. He's principled, and New York State is 50th, is dead last in all the wrong categories. It's the most expensive state in America, the highest taxes in America. It's got the most corruption in America, most out migration. I mean, New York State under Governor Cuomo is moving in the wrong direction. And the question that Rob is asking is, are we winning or are we losing as a state? And when you're dead 50th in all these categories, you're losing.
Well, we're gonna follow up on that because in my next segment, it's actually going to be E.J. McMahon from the Empire Center EJ. We're going to dissect that state budget and what was fact and what was fiction. Hey, Bill O'Reilly, you've been awesome. Please come back on this show.
I love your show, Steve. Anytime, I would love to.
Thank you, buddy. Thanks for joining us.
So
And
okay, yep.
come right
Take
back
care.
with you folks with E.J. McMahon. Bill? Yeah, I'll get back to him. See if I can move it along. I gotta breathe a little bit though. This is like a furnace in here. great, great, great. Okay. Give me the intro.
All right. Yeah, Ed, we're just going to put your mic down and he'll give you the cue. He'll give you an intro.
Can you hear me, EJ?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. I'm just going to, he's going to give me some music. I'm going to go into the show, and then I'll cue you in about a minute.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
If you're looking for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
Okay, welcome back, folks, to the show, Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is former County Executive Steve Levy, welcoming you to this show. We've had a great first two segments. I talked about a whole bunch of things in my first segment. Then last segment, we knocked it out of the park with Bill O'Reilly, the columnist from Newsday. And I told you, don't touch that dial, because if you want to find out what really happened in the state budget, not the fluff from the press releases, not the stuff you'll necessarily read from a media that always that doesn't necessarily give you the nuts and bolts and the real deal. You'll want to hear from E.J. McMahon, who is one of the leading scholars on state government today. EJ is, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's executive director of the Empire Center of New York State Public Policy. Did I get that right, EJ?
Close enough.
Okay. But EJ, you've been a hero to many taxpayer advocates here in Long Island and throughout the state for the last several years. You become really a go-to guy now when there's an article being written. You know, if they want the story from the big spenders, they'll go to some union rep. If they want a perspective from a taxpayer, from a taxpayer advocate, they go to E.J. McMahon. And what's so great is that you have so many facts at your disposal through your research center that you're able to really distinguish the fact from the fiction in these budgets and what's happening in various bills in Albany, which brings us to this latest state budget. I remember when it was introduced, and I might have had you on a month or two ago. It was back in January that it was first introduced. I remember thinking to myself, in all my years of government, and I was 8 years an executive, I never remember where an executive said, we're going to be spending our surplus in a certain way when no surplus existed. And I think that is the case in New York. And I've seen some of your writings. You were the only guy who was visible out there saying, hey, wait a minute, this is a fantasy surplus. We're in deficit mode. This surplus is speculation in future years. Is that not right?
Yes. I mean, we're not technically actually in a deficit mode right now, but he was talking, what the governor was trying to do was, he was saying, well, when I came in, I inherited a $10 billion, he called it a deficit. It was a budget gap because legally you can't have a deficit in New York.
Right, it's for the projected year coming down the road. Right.
So that, in other words, spending was outrunning revenues by $10 billion, including really wild, unrealistic projections of school aid and stuff like that. So to his credit, he closed the $10 billion gap, mostly, but not entirely, with spending cuts, some of them recurring. Now, flash forward, and he's getting ready to put out his election year budget.
And we should say there was a huge tax increase as well, $2 billion in taxes every year that came from a continuation of the higher
Right.
end tax rate, which he said he was going to
Right.
dissipate.
He,
right.
he at the end of his first year, he did a 180 and did something he said he wasn't going to do, and he extended a big chunk of the temporary tax increase that had been passed in '09 on the so-called millionaire tax on people with $1 million incomes.
Right.
And he kept that going, and so that was part of the way he actually balanced his first budget, although he didn't do it till later in the year when his receipts were coming in low.
Right.
Now he wanted to say, part of the governor likes to have narratives, and he tells stories. I don't mean, by the way, I don't mean tell stories in the sense of lying, at least not in this usual, I mean like he likes
Paint a picture.
He
Right.
wants to paint a picture,
Right.
yes. And the picture he wants you to paint is the following. I have been such a good manager, and I have restrained spending so much that I have turned a $10 billion shortfall into a $2 billion surplus. Who would have thought it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That's almost what he says. And that wow, you mean we had a $10 billion shortfall 3 years ago, and now we have a $2 billion surplus? Wow. Well, we don't. What that was, and I called it the magic footnote, he basically said that, well, look, I've held spending growth in the main state budget fund to a little over 2% a year, and I'm going to continue doing that. Mm-hmm. Although, even though if you adopt my budget as I've proposed it, there'll be gaps in future years. In fact, if you adopt the budget he proposed, he said his numbers showed you'd have a gap of $3.5 billion 4 years from now.
Right.
But he actually said, but however, I'm going to keep coming back every year and holding the legislature's growth to 2%, even though this budget doesn't do it. And if I do that,
we will then have a surplus.
We will have a $2 billion surplus by 2017, actually 2016, except we won't, because I'm going to devote it to these actions, which were a combination of real tax cuts and phony tax cuts.
Right.
So that basically is what he did. Now,
but that's rather remarkable, if I could just interject.
Yeah.
I have never, ever seen an elected official get away with that, and I will give him kudos, and you did as well. But, hey, they did at least slow the rate of growth of spending,
Oh, so he bent the curve. He, to use the Obama administration's less successful term about health costs, they bent the curve. He bent the curve. I mean,
right.
The curve was heading up steeply, and he bent it down flatter.
And that was mostly by cutting revenues to local governments, who then were bleeding and hemorrhaging.
He cut school aid, which
right.
he had to do.
Right.
He basically to the same degree his father had done 20 years earlier in a similar situation.
Right. But nevertheless, keep going.
He crammed down state agency operating spending and basically forced a contract on the unions, because remember, he writes the laws through the budget, so they knew that he could force a lot of things on them if they didn't give.
And that was a tough budget. Kudos there too.
Right.
You had three zeros, so good for him.
3 zeros and then 2 very small increases.
Right.
Now, that was essentially a clawback of something they had gotten under Spitzer and Patterson. They got average pay hikes of 4% a year right through the worst recession since the 1930s, and wouldn't give any of it up. And remember, Patterson begged them to, and they said, no, get lost. So what Cuomo did, basically, that was payback time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were held flat, and they contribute more. The higher paid state employees are contributing more to their health insurance than they used to, which was already much more than local employees.
Suffolk County pays nothing. I mean, newborns will pay up to 15%, but retirees and existing employees pay nothing. But the state guys do pay a fair share.
The state guys pay something very close to the average for the largest corporate employees.
Yeah, it might be 15% for individual and 25% or more
it's
for
actually
a
up to
family.
31% for dependents now,
if
you would make enough money. So he did that, all right? And then he attrited, they didn't hire replacements for many employees who left and retired, and so several thousand positions were eliminated that way, on top of several thousand that had been eliminated the same way under Patterson. There haven't been any layoffs in the state,
right.
just attrition. And he did that, and he cut one big school aid cut, and then a couple of very small school aid increases, which is a big item, and he capped the growth in Medicaid at about 4% a year. What happened to be a time, by the way, when they've done some things in Medicaid, but Medicaid growth nationally has sort of slowed during this period also.
I think that's mostly because of well, I know healthcare costs have slowed, and that was because of the
Right.
economy. Medicaid, might be
Yes.
various reasons for that. But getting back to, I've never seen, and the media let him get away with this, talking about it, that it was a surplus in real time. And there were a couple of guys like Mike Gormley, a great writer, formerly of the AP, now at Newsday, uncovered it. And you had mentioned it, I had mentioned it. But the reason I bring this up is because now this so-called tax cut, or tax rebate is tied to this. And what people have to understand is, first you have to what? You have to make sure that your locality is within that 2% cap. And secondly, that there has to be, in the second year of this cut or rebate, that there has to be a showing of consolidation. And your great article was all about how, again, this is a distraction. And I'm a big believer in consolidation. In fact, I've got a not-for-profit group, Center for Cost-Effective Government, that spends a lot of time on promoting consolidation. But I agree with you. The real thing we should be looking at, the driver of the cost, is not so much that we have a lot of villages as much as it is the mandates that are getting foisted upon us from the state. And nothing was done about mandates in this budget.
No. In fact, he changed the conversation. He was getting hammered for a few years. He did the tax cap, which, by the way, is another good thing. Tax cap was a good thing.
Which we have to say started back with Elliot Spitzer.
The reason we have a tax cap, that he was able to get the tax cap, is because it was put on the table by Spitzer. Yes, that's often forgotten.
And Cuomo came in and put it over the goal line from the 10, but he gets credit because he did leverage it, and it did happen.
No, look, he carried it across the goal line, and his tax cap was tighter and better than Spitzer's.
Right.
But Spitzer had a decent one, which David Patterson then embraced, although not effectively, in a report written by Tom Swazi. So you have a cast of characters here that's other than before the governor. The governor comes in and embraced, promoted, and as promised got passed a cap, and it was a broader, tighter cap than had come before. And credit to him for that. Now, he does the cap, but he doesn't, and so that crams down on the locals a lot, and then he doesn't give the locals more tools to deal with it, and the school districts and the towns and counties and cities complain. And they've been complaining for a couple of years. Hey, where's the mandate relief? Hey, our pension costs are still going up. So this year, you didn't hear that. Why didn't you hear it? He put them all in the defensive, and he said, you know what? You're the problem. There's too many of you.
Yep. And that was infuriating. I know a lot of the villages, like Paul Pontieri here from Patrick went apoplectic. I said, Paul, you can't pick your fight on the cap. The cap is a good thing. It's actually showing that it's working. In fact, this year we've had the lowest increase in school budgets in 40 years. So that's good to see. By the way, that corresponds brilliantly with when the Triborough Amendment first kicked in. And I want to talk about that in a minute. But you guys have every right in the world to complain that he's limiting your spending. They still don't have a spending cap in Albany for themselves.
Right.
But they tell others, you've got a tax cap, you have a spending cap. He didn't cap taxes, the governor. He raised taxes. And he's telling them, you can't raise taxes, but we're not going to do anything about the mandates. And I know that you've been a champion, at least exposing things like mandatory arbitration, the Triborough Amendment, the pension. And the guys in Albany say, we dealt with them. You say that's a bunch of hooey.
No. I mean, last year he had the closest thing to a layup any governor can have, because mandatory arbitration, which is we won't get into the details, but people who follow this know that's the reason police salaries are that you're approaching the $200,000 cop in Suffolk County. You're going to be there at the end of the decade, and that was what underlies big police contracts. Not only big, but police contracts with very expensive work rules and inflexibility and all sorts of things you tried to deal with as county executive.
And for the layman, that's where you're at an impasse between management and union. Under the Taylor law in New York State, you have mandatory arbitration for a lot of law enforcement, especially out here in Nassau and Suffolk. So it goes to an independent arbitrator whose decision is mandated on both sides. It's been killing us.
The arbitrator can impose a settlement, and the union can unilaterally force it there. So, and that's why it's very hard to rework these deals and make them, more cost efficient. However, the law, which is 40 years old, expires every few years. It's one of the things the legislature does to keep people coming back for more. Now, all the governor had to do to get rid of arbitration was nothing.
Right.
Okay? The legislature has a long history of never, ever overriding a governor's veto of a goodie for labor. It's not well understood, but that is an old practice. Case in point, David Patterson vetoed the shocked everybody, vetoed the entire police pension tier, which people hadn't realized was technically temporary and would phase out every few years. Patterson vetoed its continuation and set the stage for some appreciable improvement in the affordability of police pensions going forward for new hires statewide, especially in New York City. That's because at Mike Bloomberg's behest, Patterson vetoed the entire police pension tier in 2009. This was the equivalent of that. Well, what Cuomo did was he proposed a sort of a cap on arbitration settlements, which was not half bad. It was half good. Okay,
it had some holes in it, but he tried to do what Christie did and a little bit differently in Jersey.
Did in New Jersey.
A 2% a cap on 2% and no more, with some exclusions for pension or health care.
And only for distressed municipalities, which was kind of ridiculous because it should have been for everybody.
Right.
Well, then he proceeded to negotiate away everything what little he had proposed and everything he had proposed, and to come up with something acceptable to the unions. And guess what? With the firefighter unions in the forefront, and the state firefighter union president later boasted online in his blog, on his website, they brought in the International, which is the name for the national union, which is very powerful in Democratic politics. And they leaned on the governor, and the final plan was something the governor loudly proclaimed to be a reform, and which he continues to do to this day.
That was nonsense.
Which absolutely everybody in local government and public sector labor circles will tell you was not a reform.
Right, and I knew. The minute I heard that he was putting a panel together to look at this, and he put the union on the panel, this was dead on arrival. They didn't do that with the tax cap panel. They said, this is what we have to do, let's do it. They implemented it. With this, they wanted an out. That's exactly what happened. Nothing happens. A bunch of window dressing, hoping that people would just say it's going to go away. But now, Mike Fitzpatrick, an outstanding assemblyman. In fact, I should do this plug. The three of us are going to be at the Melville Marriott. I'm going to be the moderator. You're going to be speaking in, purely educational tones. Mike Fitzpatrick will be there talking about his bill to end a lot of these mandates. It's May 8th at 7 p.m. at the Melville Marriott. It's sponsored by Long Islanders for Education Reform. There should be about 300-400 people there. But Mike Fitzpatrick has often said, we need in New York, what we need is a Wisconsin moment. Something where like a Scott Walker says, damn it, I don't care what this cost me. We're going to the wall. And like you say, that could have happened with arbitration. If you really wanted to get it done, it could have been done that way. And the other issue is the Triborough Amendment, which is what?
The Triborough Amendment is a law unique to New York that says that all the terms and conditions of a contract, including pay schedules that call for annual automatic pay increases based on longevity or seniority, will stay in effect and continue to unfold even after a contract has expired. And what that means, and that's particularly costly to school districts, because teachers spend 20 to 30 years climbing automatically up a pay ladder.
And they're getting steps.
Every year they get a 3 to 4% pay increase.
And it's not, so to explain this though, it's not only the negotiated 3% that they had with the management, it's an additional 3 or 4% in what's called a step.
Right. It's called steps. When you read in the paper that, the Patchogue teachers have agreed to a new contract and they're holding the pay increase to just 2%. Okay.
Not true.
Well, their pay increase most teachers are getting is not 2%. It's 2% plus the step.
Right.
And
with cops as well, and most municipal
cops as well too. They have fewer steps, but their steps are much steeper. It's like by leaps and bounds. Or in the first
after like 5-6 years, you're over $100,000 already because of the steps. Right.
So what happens is. And this changes the dynamics of negotiations because let's say you're in a situation that you get into a fiscal crisis or something, forget about arbitration for a minute, with any of these unions, and you're saying, look, we need some concessions. Can we rework this deal? We need to, if you want to get any more money at all or avoid layoffs, we need to restructure this cost item. We need people to work a little longer. We need this. We need that. Well, the union knows that if it just sits on its hands,
they're going to get paid anyway.
Do anything. They're going to keep getting raises.
Right.
So
no incentive.
The lie. How many times have people listening to this show seen a lawn sign somewhere in Long Island that says, Levittown teachers, 390 days without a contract, right?
That doesn't mean 390 days without a pay increase.
They've been working 390 days without a raise.
Right.
In fact, in New York City, Mike Mulgrew has been saying, we haven't had a raise, since 2008. Well, actually, and I did a study of this in New York City, the city is spending $2 billion more today on teachers than it did 6 years ago, a period when there's no contract. I mean, like
How can
they
that
haven't had
happen?
a contract, but they've kept getting raises. The 57,000 teachers continuously employed in that period have gotten, pretty considerable average raises. More than inflation.
Educating the public is so important because before you can fix the problem, you have to understand the problem, and very few people understand this. When I go around talking about this at a chamber of commerce or a civic, people's eyes open and say, "I didn't know that." And what you do is so important to educate people. Hey, listen, these are the facts. Now you can say it's good, keep it like that, or you can change it. But I'm going to tell you the facts because you're not getting the facts, and that's why it's so commendable for what you guys do. Just a segue real fast.
Yeah.
School aid was big thing, up to another 5% increase in a
5.3 to be exact.
That I thought we were in all this fiscal distress, but now up to 5% again, and yet pre-K was a big part of this. Somehow they found money for that. It was a big dueling thing between de Blasio. Hey, de Blasio, you want to increase people who live under you? Go ahead. But now the governor comes in, didn't want to be one up, and said, no, we're going to do it for everyone. But then you have the commissioner of education saying, hey, it's going to cost $1.5 million a year, and I think they put in $300 million for New York City and $40 million for the rest of the state. And say we're done. We got pre-K.
And
is this
it's
real?
Going to be $1.5 billion over 5 years,
right,
total. This is like a double-edged sword. Like what you're saying about pre-K reminds me of the old joke about the two ladies who go to the restaurant, and talk about the restaurant. The one lady says the food there is terrible, and the other lady says yes, in such small portions. Look, pre-K was not a priority was a priority for almost no one outside New York City.
Partially because the statistics are vary tremendously. There's not empirical evidence that it works. A lot of studies show it doesn't, but that's for another day.
With everything else that's going on in the world, the public schools have a lot of priorities way ahead of pre-K.
Including funding full-day kindergarten, which they haven't done yet. But go ahead.
But however, and in fact, I think that if Bill de Blasio hadn't been elected mayor, I don't think Cuomo would have spent a dime on pre-K.
No question. I think he didn't want to be outflanked on the left by de Blasio.
He wanted to. He couldn't just say no to de Blasio.
Right.
He had to say, he had to say sort of yes, but rather yes, do it this way, but no to your tax increase. So he's going to get now de Blasio, who clearly came out of this a diminished figure, somebody who was exposed as being inept, having bad instincts, and mishandling it right down the line.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw him getting booed throwing out the first pitch. That was nasty to look at.
So that happens to a lot of mayors too.
Yeah, it happens to all of us. Let me tell you, every elected official.
I'm sure you probably in your heyday it probably happened.
I was at 70% in the polls. I was still booed a lot of times.
So, but the thing is, he nonetheless, and he bungled it. It was a bad idea, and Cuomo was right to say no, but But I'll tell you, if you look at what actually happened, de Blasio walks out of this with $300 million more for pre-K, with another $300 million mostly for his charter schools. Now, he ineptly was seen as beating up on charter schools. The governor stepped in, championed charter schools, as he should have.
Right.
Well, between the school aid increase and the charter school tuition increase and the pre-K money, the city is coming out of this budget cycle with, by my count, close to $1 billion more.
Well, he can count that as a win, despite the fact that he got bloodied up.
Right.
We're down to our last couple of seconds here, EJ. I want to thank you. We'll see you on the 8th. Thank you for educating the people of New York, Long Island. You can hear this from EJ McMahon and so much more on May 8th at the Melville Marriott. We'll see you in the next segment. Thanks, EJ.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, I just emailed him to see if he'll do it a little early. Whew. Take a breather. think he's going to call in from 676 number. So be ready for that. We got 2 minutes. Common Core. Lane, I love your stuff because one, it's humorous. Two Newsday columns. One was I love reading his stuff because it really was moderate. That Lane? Okay.
He's on.
Hey, Lane.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
Hey, great. Oh, you're coming in really clear. Wonderful. Thanks so much for doing it. It's going to be fun.
No problem. I'm excited.
Yeah, you're in great company. Got off the last segment with E.J. McMahon from the Empire Center and Bill O'Reilly, not from Fox, but the fellow who writes for Newsday. Everyone's got a Sunday columnist. So two Newsday columnists on one day today. Wow. So
you don't have many liberals coming on, huh?
No, well, they're hard to get. It's not that I don't want them. I'm always trying to get like the ACLU types and the union types. They shy away from it for some reason, But I do get them most of. We had somebody from the AFL-CIO last week and a Tea Party guy. It was awesome,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm honoring your request to just be me and you. Very educational kind of conversation about the Common Core. Your article on the lottery, your article on the Tiger Mom, where I agree with you 100%. And we'll just shoot the breeze, try to educate people. What the heck is Common Core that they're all protesting over, So, okay, so he's going to do the intro. You may or may not hear that. You'll hear me start it. I'll go right into it, and then I'll cue you probably a minute into my little chat.
Okay. Are we not on 103.9? Are we on something else?
We are, but it's not live today. Because it's usually a Saturday afternoon live show, but I'm going to be away, so we're taping this. So it will air on 2 p.m. on Saturday.
Okay.
Okay, great. Ready when you are, Paul?
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to start it up.
correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 103.9 LI News Radio.
Hey, and welcome back to our last segment, folks. You're listening to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is former County Executive Steve Levy welcoming you back. Quite a bonus for you today. We have not one but two Newsday columnists in our 2 hours here. The first having been Bill O'Reilly, not of Fox News fame, but Bill O'Reilly, the Republican strategist who writes weekly for Newsday. But now in this last segment, we have columnist Lane Filler, who is really part of the whole Newsday editorial team. And welcome to the show, Lane, for the first time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And I love your stuff. You come out usually on a Wednesday with your column. Number one, it's very humorous. And number two, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I sense from your writings that you're moderate to a little bit right of center, which is something different for a lot of major newspapers. Did I characterize you correctly? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I'm probably libertarian-ish. You know, I'm pretty a la carte, issue by issue.
I would
classify a lot of things.
I classify myself as that way. I think 80% of the public, Lane, is fiscally conservative and socially moderate. If only we had a party for that, you know. But
yeah, well, you know, I think that's generally true. But what you run into is I think you roadblock where people are not fiscally conservative about that one program that puts the check into their mailbox.
Oh, you got that right. It's like, and they hate Congress except for their own congressmen, and they want cuts except for something cutting their own program. They want taxes frozen, but they don't want their services cut. That is the name of the game. Why it's so difficult to be an elected official, especially in this state and on this island. And there are so many tough issues that people are talking about right now. And the reason I wanted you on the show is because you've had 3 articles over the last month or two, which kind of tie together a bit, and they're so insightful, and they relate. And one of them was about the lottery and the money we're getting from the state. Is it going to the place it was always intended with schools? Secondly, is spending more on schools the answer? Because you also had that article you wrote about the Tiger Mom. And for those who don't know, the Tiger Mom is a Yale professor. She's an Asian woman who says that, you know, certain ethnic backgrounds, certain cultures, I should say, push education more than others, and that's where they succeed more. And she got clobbered as a racist and everything else. She's Asian, by the way. And then the third was Common Core, which seeks to increase standards. So here we are talking about education. Part of it's about money. Part of it is about the standards we set. Part of it is what happens at home, whether you're a Tiger Mom or an absentee dad, you know, whatever the case may be. I think they all mold together. And your writings have been quite profound on this, especially that on Common Core. You know, you write that, you know, we do need higher standards. I think that's what Common Core seeks to do. But there is such an outcry about Common Core. And when I first saw this, Lane, I was trying to figure out, what is Common Core? So I started, you know, Googling it and going on the internet, and I got these esoteric explanations. Well, it's more holistic. It's not just memorization. It's trying to get a kid to think. But when I asked, well, explain to me what that means. What is different about it than otherwise? I have a law degree. I've been a county executive. I have, you know, college degree. I couldn't figure it out. I think many of the people who are protesting it don't know what it is, that they can even explain what it is, other than the kids are taking a lot of tests. Can you explain this to us, what it is? Yeah. What do you think it is? What is it?
Well, here, let me start. I'm going to with a tiny history lesson.
Okay.
In 2001, George Bush and Teddy Kennedy got together and passed No Child Left Behind. It's a really well-intentioned law. Aspects of it are completely insane. But one of the things it said was that every school, every district, and in fact every child was going to have to be up to a certain standard. They were going to have to meet standards of proficiency in a time about around 2013, 2014.
And by the way, this is implemented in many, many other states around the nation. So this isn't unique to New York or new. So that's what you're saying, right? Okay.
So No Child Left Behind was this federal law that said everybody has to meet standards or they'll be considered to be failing. What it didn't do was set a federal standard. It said South Carolinians have to meet South Carolina standards and Massachusetts has to meet Massachusetts standards. The problem was that the standards were wildly varying. So two of the two states I just mentioned, South Carolina and Massachusetts, had incredibly high standards, and all their districts and schools failed them almost immediately. Other states had very low standards. All the schools and more of the students met them. It made them look better. What Common Core actually is was an attempt to say, okay, No Child Left Behind doesn't make any sense unless we have a federal definition of what proficiency means.
And that would have been the first time that you had a national standard, which I think is why a lot of these conservative groups are against it, which is paradoxical and somewhat anti-intuitive, because on the one hand, they preach more higher standards. You know, they want less of students controlling the classroom and more standards and more discipline at school. And now you have a plan to actually implement the testing that will increase those standards, but they balk at it being a national standard because it usurps local authority, they're saying, correct?
And to be fair, on constitutional purity, I have to give it to them. Mm-hmm. Between the enumerated powers, between the 9th and 10th Amendment, it's pretty clear that the Constitution doesn't lay out any federal responsibility or oversight for education. That being said, this is one of those purity constitutional issues where the ship sailed so long ago. Mm-hmm. There is so much federal funding of education. There's so much federal oversight of education. There has been for 50 years that it's very difficult. So what you do have is a far-right, libertarian, strict constitutionalist group of people that are saying, oh, the feds shouldn't have any part of this, and this is the newest, biggest overreach. And then you have a much more mainstream conversation going on about whether the standards themselves make sense.
And then you have, you know, also the fact that many of these guys are saying that they're over testing my kid, and it may or may not be true, I don't know, but they're balking at the feds laying this out, and then you have the feds saying, well, no one's mandated to adopt our standards. But really they are, because then they lose money if they don't. Is that correct, or do I have that wrong?
Well, yeah, there's a pot of money called Race to the Top that a couple things states had to do to qualify for it. New York got $700 million. And one of those things was to adopt Common Core standards, and the other was to have true performance-related evaluations of teachers. And this is where two different issues get conflated, because you have teachers in the education establishment don't like one part of it, and then sometimes you have parents that don't like the other, and they form sort of one big lobby with not necessarily exactly the same goals.
Right. Because I think that the teachers were at one point, I think, for the Common Core. Then when it got lumped into evaluation, they see that there's this mass groundswell against Common Core, and they seem to be joining in because it will prevent the evaluations from going forward. That's the way I took it.
Correct. You had the teachers responding first, or the teachers' unions, because they were most knowledgeable. They don't want the evaluations done this way. And they had a lot of success stirring up a lot of parents and a lot of PTAs. And to be fair, and I really do want to be fair about this, the rollout of Common Core was abysmal in New York.
Yeah.
The state education department didn't do a great job of explaining it. They promised to set up the curriculums, which has never been their responsibility, and they don't have the staff to do it. And then so they sort of failed at that, which left districts sort of not with the curriculums they needed. Now, I think what's interesting to me is that was a great argument against Common Core last year. It's a decent argument against Common Core this year. But next year will be the third year, and at some point you have to stop talking about the rollout and stop blaming the state for the fact that the districts didn't come up with great curriculum.
And they did slow it down. But then the question is this. Is it just the fact that, it's a debate over there's going to be one standardized federal test, or was it, I thought it was about, Common Core was a different style of teaching where it's supposed to be more holistic and not memorization. And I couldn't get anyone, including teachers, to really explain that to me so I can get my hands around it. What's different in the teaching of the Common Core method as opposed to the existing method? Do you know that answer?
Yeah, it's different for English than it is for math. But actually, let me bring my daughter into it, who's in the 7th grade, and say, so, for instance, this year, for the last couple of weeks, because they started taking the test this week, and for the last couple of months even, they were prepping for the English Language Arts test.
Right.
What's interesting about it is that the only way to teach to this test was to have her read pieces of fiction and nonfiction, mostly nonfiction, and then write credible essays about them. In other words, the only way to teach to this test was to actually make her develop the skill.
Okay, so it wasn't just
which to
memorization.
me is a very positive thing.
Okay.
Now, what you're seeing blow up in math is that there is a holistic sort of sense. We don't just want to teach you the process, for instance, of subtraction. We want to give you, because, all right, you cross this out, you carry the 3, blah, 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 you know how to do it. The problem is you don't necessarily understand anything about math or numbers or what a negative number really means or the relationship of all these things. Mm-hmm. Their attempts to teach this, at least early on, are just confounding kids a little bit, and they're really more than the kids. They are confounding parents who are trying to help kids with their homework.
That might be the root of it. Johnny comes home, hey, Mom, help me, Dad, help me with this homework. It used to be, 16 divided by 4. Now it's explain why this is happening, and they're scratching their head. So it's more of a narrative, or there's a narrative now included in the teaching as well as just the numbers.
It's that, and it's part of this, though, is you got to look at the fact that it's always changing. When I was a kid, my parents didn't understand the terminology they used for, quote, new math.
Right.
Now, when my daughter brings stuff home, for some, they're using, instead of saying factor, they're using a different word, and I have to Google things and number trees and this stuff. But this is always changing. There's always scholarship going on about education and the right way to do it. And there's, so I think almost, at least in my lifetime, every set of parents has been sort of confounded by their kids' homework, both because they forgot the skills and because it's changed.
So, no, but what has been happening in other states? Did they make this change just like New York is being asked to make this change? And how come, maybe I didn't just read about it, but I don't remember the blowback, the pushback in these other states as you're seeing here. Am I wrong?
So remember, you're not just in New York, but you're on Long Island.
Right.
And this is very positively and very negatively probably the world capital of helicopter parenting.
Yes.
So this is Common Core is 45 states so far, and the District of Columbia, and several of the states that haven't adopted it have adopted very similar standards and call them something else. Texas is an example of that. Indiana is claiming that they're pulling away from Common Core, but they're actually kind of just changing the name too. The blowback, you're starting to, so New York is sort of forward in this. Kentucky really went first, and we're kind of right behind Kentucky. But you have to understand, okay, so what's the blowback about?
But wait, are you saying that we're in the early, are we one of the first states? I thought there were a whole lot of states that have already done this.
There are a whole lot of states committed to it. They're at different stages of implementation.
Okay.
What we are, though, is, so we're the second state to experience, we got the tests back, and while statewide, year before last, about 60% of kids qualified as either proficient or very proficient. In the first year of Common Core testing, 30% of kids qualified as proficient or very proficient.
So now it's tough on their esteem. That's another thing. Mom and Dad, in this new world where everyone gets a trophy, a lot of people don't want to see Johnny or Jill failing. And
well, you really don't want to see it if you moved here from Queens and you're paying $18,000 a year in property
tax. Right. Isn't the idea behind this, though, that we want to, do a curriculum so over time the grades will start coming up, which means they'll be learning more, so that we'll no longer be 27th or 25th in comparison to other Western democracies on the educational scale. Because one thing's for sure, we sure as hell spend a lot more money than other states and spend a lot more than other nations, but we don't have the results to show for it. And there were a lot of people like Michelle Wee, formerly the superintendent of Washington, D.C., who did a magnificent job trying to bring about reform, and others trying to reform and raise the standards. This is their effort to do that. The question is, do you think this is the means by which to increase the standards, which everyone says we want to increase standards?
I think it's better to do it than not to do it. I was amazed maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago to read a wonderful piece in the New York Times that harkened back to sort of people talking about standardized testing in Boston in the year 1860. And it sounded like it came out of today's article.
And the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Well enough, and there's a huge socioeconomic difference, and the black kids in Boston aren't doing as well as the white kids in 1860. And you end up with a situation, Steve, that education is so important, and it presents so many problems, and people don't really know how to fix the problems, and yet you can never walk away from it. You can never wash your hands of it. You have to keep attacking it and attacking it and attacking it, because it's not okay, essentially to have a perennial underclass in this country that we can't figure out how to educate.
Well, speaking of that underclass, some people out there, some sectors say the only way to solve it is just keep throwing more money at it. If we spent more money, you'd have a better result. Now, I look at some of the lower economic strata schools on Long Island. They're not getting less money per student. They're getting $20,000 per student, but the students are still underachieving. Yeah. And here comes the Tiger Mom. And the Tiger Mom says it has nothing to do with money. It's all about the family background. And if you look at those ethnic groups or those cultures that excel the most, it's Asians, it's Jewish population, it might be Iranians, Lebanese, there's an African nation in there too. What they all have in common is they seek to overachieve. It's a two-parent, tightly knit family, and they stress education to the max. And she says there's a correlation. I happen to agree with her, and unfortunately, a lot of times you're called racist for this, but culturally it's important. You could spend $50,000 on a student if that student is going home to a dad that's not there and a mother who's on crack. That kid's not going to learn. I mean,
well, I think there's a fundamental concept that we have an incredibly hard time with in the United States, and it's this. For groups or for people, even for individuals in most cases, who are underachieving badly in school, the problem is not the 6 hours a day they are in school. The problem is the 18 hours a day that they are not in school.
Bingo.
That being said, nobody has any very good ideas of how to set up a government strategy to deal with the 18 hours a day the kids aren't in school.
Right, like the Tiger Mom's talking about cultural changes, and that does not come from any kind of government legislation. And you do have conservative pundits from Bill O'Reilly, the talk show host, to Cal Thomas and others who saying this is what it is. Which brings us to your article on the lottery. Now, this might be a place we disagree a little. We both agree it's not what people thought it was going to be. And I remember reading your article that you believe that early on the lottery was about getting more money to educate the kids. I think we'll both agree the money is going toward education. There's a myth out there that it's being siphoned off for the general fund. It's not. It's being used for education. But the way I remember it being sold was, hey, allow us to do the lottery and we'll curb your taxes. And at every dollar we get from the lottery, it'll keep control over your taxes. And all they did was throw more money into the pot. And you started this curve going up where more and more money was being spent and no correlation to outcome.
So sort of yes and sort of no.
Okay.
For one thing, so it's true that the money went to education. It always has. But it never increased the spending on education. They took $100 million from the lottery and put it in education, and took $100 million from the general fund that had been going to education and put it somewhere else.
Notwithstanding that, though, the amount of money that has gone in the overall state budget to education has rocketed. I mean, over the last 20 years, notwithstanding the fact that since 2009, it's leveled off a little bit. So, we're in agreement there, right?
Yeah, well, the fun thing about education and funding is here's the riddle that no one can quite figure out, okay? Picture a classroom with 25 kids in it.
Or in the case of 63 kids when I was in St. Pancras Elementary School in the Queens. And I learned, by the way. I learned because of those nuns. But go ahead.
So picture the classroom with 25 kids in it. Now, picture a district, most of them on Long Island, that spend $25,000 per student per year. So for the kids in this classroom, the budget to educate them for this year is $625,000. Okay.
Right.
Now the teacher up front gets 100 plus benefits. Where's the other $500,000?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know a lot of it's going to growth in aids for special ed and a lot of bureaucracy. But most of it, I understood, was personnel. And in a minute,
it is personnel, but man, other than the teacher up front, I think it's very odd for normal people to try to figure out, well, what are all the other personnel doing?
Yeah, there's a lot of administrative personnel.
500,000 left over from the 625,000.
And somehow Fairfax, Virginia, which is quite similar to us in Long Island, demographically, geographically, economically, they have one centralized school district and do very, very well, where we have 69 districts in Suffolk alone, Hey, in the minute left, Lane, give us a synopsis to where you think education on Long Island is going and Common Core.
I think education on Long Island and Common Core are both going to continue. Hopefully Common Core will become a little bit less contentious as people get used to it. But the numbers of people who did not take the test this week are kind of astounding.
Yeah.
I think it all relates to the bigger issue of Long Island, which is there any possible way to get people to keep paying all of these taxes? And when home prices are not increasing as they were and salaries of people in the private sector are not increasing as they were, how do you actually keep everyone on Long Island from moving to the Carolinas?
Well, that's the question for the next show. And I got to tell you, you have done more, Lane Phillip from Newsday, in these last 20 minutes to explain Common Core than I have heard anyone say over the last 6 months. Thank you, Lane. Hope you'll come back on the show again.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. We'll see you again next week.